Well, welcome to another episode of Saucers and Aliens Radio. I'm Randy. I'm the owner of the UFO store, and I'm here with the UFO guy. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Randy.
Well, we've really got something to talk about tonight. The Philadelphia experiment. Now, there's no way we can cover that in one show, is there, Bill?
No, this is what we're going to do tonight is we're going to give you an introduction to what it is, how it's connected to the UFO phenomenon, things like that, and then over a period of shows, which will take quite a bit of time, so be patient, watch for the shows to appear online, and listen to them live when you can, and we will eventually cover this subject to the max, because I really feel like we've got more information on it than really anybody else.
I agree. And Bill, you just seem to be one of the foremost experts on the history, both the true history and the fake histories. You've heard them all about the Philadelphia experiment, and it's great to know that I'm talking with someone who can actually discern the difference. You've been there with the people involved even. Tell us a little bit about it. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's begin with how how the Navy perceives it. If you were to contact the United States Navy, they would tell you today that there never was such a thing as the Philadelphia experiment. It's a myth, it's a tall tale, an urban legend. Okay, and they'll even send you a letter to that effect. But the thing about the Philadelphia experiment, it's one of those things that will not go away. The more you look into it, the more there is to it. Most things that are mythological or fake or phony in the UFO field are quickly exposed. I mean, within a couple of years, it's pretty obvious that something did or did not happen. But see, with the Philadelphia experiment, it's something that has grown in terms of information, and over the years, we've had more people come forward, more information. So this is how I'm going to start it. I'm going to start it by telling you the beginnings of it. The beginnings of it started at Princeton University in New Jersey, okay? See, the Navy had a couple of problems on their hands. One, they wanted to find a way to detect enemy subs that were coming into U.S. harbors. I mean, imagine you're in a world war, okay? Everybody's got submarines. Maybe they're not that sophisticated, but they're sophisticated enough that during World War II, there were incidents both on the east and west coast of shots being fired, torpedoes being fired, things being blown up.
U-boats were really a very significant thing in the early, right from 1940 on. I mean, we couldn't find them, we couldn't reach them with planes. So they really controlled everything. So this was a high priority.
That's right. And the other problem was that in addition to
mines,
submarines that would be coming into major ports, they had a problem with some of the ships. See, the Germans had developed a very sophisticated magnetic mine, okay, that was attracted to the magnetized metal of battleships and carriers and so on, because in the process of building these ships and also the process of the electronics on board, everything else, everything that's done on a ship causes a lot of magnetization to build up over a period of time. Now, the demagnetization process was really annoying. They'd have to go into port, okay? They'd have to take most of the important electronics off of the ship, and they have to string these huge telephone pole with wires all around the deck, and then they'd create sort of a degaussing effect, a demagnetization effect. But they figured if they went to the Princeton scientists, they'd find a better way to solve both these problems. Now, in those days, Einstein was at Princeton, and we do know for a fact, because it is a fact, that Einstein was under contract to the U.S. Navy during World War II. What he did, we don't know, and it's never been declassified. But we do know there were people like von Neumann. There were a lot of really, and of course, he created the first workable computer, even though it was, several floors, big in Princeton. It still was the first really good workable computer that would be, I guess you could say, would be akin to what we use today in our home. So you had some very heavy hitters there. You had all kinds of people there. And their work was mostly supported by legions of younger physicists that were learning under them at Princeton. And a lot of these younger physicists were getting into some very bizarre things. They were getting into new areas like quantum physics, astrophysics, things which in a sense, almost day by day were being created by them. So they had an idea. Since most of this was thrown out to them, in other words, most of the work that, let's say, the heavy hitters would do was put in the hands of these young guys. They thought, you know what? We've got some unproven theories, and this is the perfect way to prove them. For example, what they wanted to do with the idea of degaussing battleships was they came back to the Navy and they said, well, you know what? You're concerned about mines hitting the ships, and that's a legitimate concern. And we can solve your little problem with degaussing them. But suppose we could go one better. Suppose we could make them almost invisible in terms of radar, because radar was another big thing. I mean, the Germans had a very sophisticated system of radar that was much more sophisticated than the English had. The English invented it, you know, but
right.
this was really much, much better. So they said, suppose we could hide the ships from radar. Well, they liked that.
Sure.
What they didn't tell the Navy was that they had plans to do a lot more than that. They had plans, and they believed, based on the figures that they put on their blackboards, they believed that they could take a ship and make it totally invisible to the naked eye. Now, they knew there'd be a process in this, and it would be expensive, but it's wartime. You know, the Navy needs stuff, and, you know, as far as money goes, it's flowing like water. So
right.
they pretty much, when they told the Navy that, they were pretty much given all the money they wanted.
Sure.
And at that point, what the physicists did was they started working on this program where, okay, yes, the ship will be invisible to radar, but they were going to create these huge magnetic fields, which would, in a sense, displace the ship in time and space. In other words, it would displace it just enough out of sync of what the normal reality that everybody sees is, so that it would not be seen by, it would still be there, but not be seen by anybody.
Yeah, kind of a chameleon effect.
Exactly. But see, almost from the beginning.
Bending light rays around it.
Yeah, things like that. But from the beginning, they ran into problems because they created such huge magnetic, fields that, for example, one of the early experiments, several of the early experiments, but one of them was done with caged animals, okay, in the nearby Philadelphia Navy shipyard. Now, the reason it's called the Philadelphia experiment is because the Philadelphia Navy shipyard was the nearest shipyard that they could get to Princeton University. In fact, it's only about an hour's drive away. So it was perfect. You know, it was perfect setting. And they took an uncommissioned battleship escort, which later became the USS Eldridge. It wasn't commissioned yet. It wasn't, officially in use. And they put some animals on board just to see how these, because they were very concerned about how these magnetic fields would affect living things.
So
and
the Eldridge was the same ship throughout the Philadelphia experiments?
Yes, as far as we know. Now, as far as we know, with that particular phase of it, there's many phases of it. We'll talk about it in future programs. But in that particular phase of it, that was the only ship being used that we know about.
And the reason, no doubt the Eldridge existed. So, I mean, part of the legend, that people have said, Philadelphia experiment never happened. But the work was done on the USS Eldridge, and that was a real ship.
Oh, absolutely. And, of course, the Navy will tell you, the first crew that was put on board, they recently had a reunion. They had a reunion in New Jersey, and they said, well, this stuff never happened when they were on the ship. And that's very true, because they weren't the crew that was used. They were the commissioned crew, okay? The non-commissioned crew were people that were hand-chosen, okay, and, for this particular purpose during a time when it was not officially a naval ship yet. It was being used for testing. So they take these animals, put them on board in cages, and the first problem they had was that some of the animals died, but others started to literally, as the ship kind of started to vanish, right at the dock. This happened right in the dock at Philadelphia.
Right.
Apparently, some of the animals just became a part of the superstructure of the ship. They kind of phased in and out and got stuck in the metal. How this happened, I don't know. I don't know the processes involved because, apparently it was very complicated physics that we're dealing with here. But this is what eyewitnesses said happened. Now, they didn't want to go to the Navy and say this was a total, disaster because, after all, the ship did vanish. So they tried again. Now, in one of the other experiments, something even stranger happened. Apparently, they were setting up another dock at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York City, where they could also receive and potentially supply and also repair anything that had to do with this particular experiment, because they had plans to sail the Eldridge ultimately to New York City and then use that kind of as a jumping off point, for any ships that had this equipment on board to cross, the Atlantic, which made a lot of sense because the Brooklyn Navy Yard was really much better suited for modern technological purposes, for this whole thing.
Right.
Apparently, at some point, and I'm not sure why, but apparently they had some equipment they were testing in Brooklyn, and during one of the tests of the Eldridge in Philadelphia, apparently seconds after they turned the equipment on, the ship, the Eldridge, appeared in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And when they turned it off, the ship went back immediately to its original position in Philadelphia Navy Shipyard. So now,
was this witnessed?
Oh yeah, it was witnessed by many people, and this may have happened several times. I know that there's witnesses to that event, but there's also stories that this happened once in Virginia. They had moved some equipment down to the big shipyard down in Norfolk, Virginia.
Right.
But also, once again, because they were planning on, equipping most of the ships with this equipment, because it was such a phenomenal idea. I mean, just to make a ship radar invisible was a huge thing. It was a wonderful idea. It's great. So, I mean, they, so apparently this also happened once where the ship vanished from the Philadelphia Navy Shipyard and appeared in Virginia, in the Norfolk Shipyard. And then, once again, once the equipment was turned back, it went back again. This created a huge number of problems for the people working on the project. But the Navy was happy because they were basically getting what they wanted. And, of course, these guys, these physicists, were not giving them the entire story. They were not saying, well, we've got these little problems, because they really felt that because, again, this is all new territory, okay?
Right.
They're using theoretical calculations. So their idea was, we can work this out. We can, these are a few problems, but we can work them out. So they went back to the drawing board and started to work on this again. They tried the experiment again with the animals, and this time it was fairly successful. I mean, there were no incidents of animals dying and none being caught in the deck. But they also noticed that they needed to have a slightly stronger magnetic field than what they were using. And the reason is because even though the ship vanished, you could still kind of see this, I'd almost describe it as an outline, if you will. If you were close enough in an enemy ship, or maybe a sub using a periscope, you might see the outline of the ship. So the idea was to make it totally invisible, create stronger fields. So they decided finally to put a test crew on board, which they did. They had the test crew, had been training for months. They were all ready, okay? And
yeah.
I've met at least 2 members of the test crew over the years, and we'll cover that in future shows. But apparently they wanted to try this out at sea, because they're like, okay, this works in the dock, but if it doesn't work out at sea, it's completely useless. So they brought it out to sea. They surrounded the Eldridge with other ships that were observation ships, and they basically turned the generator on. And this time, there was a problem again, because some of the men that were on the ship became a part of the superstructure of the ship. They faded into the wooden deck or into the metal superstructure parts. Some of them were saved by cutting an arm or a leg off. Others simply faded away and were never seen again.
Yeah.
But worse than that was that many members of the crew, after the experiment was over, when they turned off the juice and the ship reappeared, the news wasn't good. A lot of these guys were put in the Philadelphia Navy Shipyard Hospital mental ward because they started to go crazy.
Crazy, right? Yeah, completely bonkers.
And it's amazing. Shortly after that, there was this bizarre article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is a big newspaper in town in Philadelphia, about a bar fight at one of the bars that's adjacent to the shipyard, right outside the main entrance. And apparently these 2 guys got in a fight. Inside the bar, one of them faded into the back room, except there was no back room. They basically faded into the wall. Faded out again, came out front of the bar, and while they were out front, and both of these were sailors from the Eldridge, both of them became translucent, almost completely transparent, and then suddenly became physically, people could see them again. But this was witnessed by, civilians. And this made it into the Philadelphia Inquirer. So, I mean, it's very hard. Again, it's the kind of story that's crazy. It's insane. but there's enough supporting evidence to say something's going on.
Wow, this is really got a lot to it. I mean, we could talk
And these
about
are just
this.
the beginnings.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. I know there's so much more. So we're going to take a short break and pay some bills, and we'll be right back.
4,734 UFO sightings in 2007. 854 abductions by aliens or unknown species reported by American and British citizens, and hundreds more suspectedly unreported in 2007. Suppressed information about collisions with passenger aircraft and UFOs that has been kept from the public knowledge for years, and only one trusted source on information from some of the top UFO researchers in the world. Exclusive information that cannot be found anywhere else on the planet. Trusted, connected, accurate. The UFOstore.com. Expand your personal library with fast shipping and instant downloadable information from the largest selection of UFO products on the internet by going to theufostore.com or call on the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week order line at 541-523-2630. The truth is out there, and the UFOstore.com has it.
Okay, Bill, let's do a short recap, but before we do, I would like anybody out there listening to Saucers and Aliens Radio to take that extra effort and become a friend and mark us as a favorite, and we'd like to spread the word, and that's how it's done. So we need your help and support. Plus, Bill, we've had many requests for interviews from people. In fact, I spoke with Jesse Marcel Jr. today, and he would like to be on the show. So we should talk about this for upcoming episodes where we get to actually have people on that we can have callers and call-ins and that sort of thing. So anyhow, the Philadelphia experiment, it starts with the USS Eldridge before it's commissioned.
Yeah, basically begins as an idea, okay,
right, of
a way to create new technology that will, one, guard our harbors, okay, create an electromagnetic detection system, okay, to detect subs coming in, and also an electromagnetic system to instantly degauss Navy ships. In other words, what they would do is they'd put a special piece of equipment on board each ship, which would instantly degauss the ships, and more importantly, would do so without damaging any of the electric equipment on board. You know, the radar, whatever they had. Yeah, well, that's the idea. But then they did take it a step further, and they wanted to create a huge electromagnetic field which would, one, make the ship radar invisible, and two, make it optically invisible to the eye.
Right.
And within all this, what they didn't understand, because, see, the concept of quantum physics was so new that I think one of the only people, probably two of the only people that understood time-space, or three, let me add three. Three people that understood the concept of time-space being one thing in those days was von Neumann, Einstein, and Nikola Tesla. And all of them were involved in this experiment. Tesla lesser so, because he was a bit of an egomaniac. He did not work and play well with others. So he was more than a little nipped when he found out that some of the equipment he helped develop was being, I won't say perverted, but being changed enough to do some things which he wasn't told they were going to do, namely to create this invisibility factor. He just thought he was creating equipment to degauss ships, you know.
And this is von Neumann?
Yeah, no, this was Tesla.
Oh,
now
Tesla.
Later Tesla was told and did agree to an extent to stay on the project for a while. But ultimately he left because, again, he did not work and play well with others, especially other scientists. So,
now, Bill, let me take a quick break.
Sure.
And I want to tell the people that are listening that the truth about the Philadelphia experiment is a 2-DVD set available at the UFO store. It's $14.95, and it's got
like 6 hours.
It's like 6 hours long, and it's got Al Balick, who we haven't even talked about yet, and many other people, but it's a very, very comprehensive DVD. We also offer the Philadelphia Experiment, The Truth About the Philadelphia Experiment MP3 downloads, which is a lecture series that was done. It's a 3-part series. Those are just $1.95 each, and those are, I think, a total of 6 more hours in audio. So, and it's also been covered many times in Saucers and Aliens magazine. So I invite everybody to take a look at this, and if they want to explore this subject even farther, because you could study it for a week solid and not even come close to understanding it. But these give you the good tools that are not available anywhere else in the world. So go ahead now. Bill, we've taken them out to sea trials. We had the bad results. Where do we go now?
Well, see, the idea was, again, to try very, very hard to make this thing work for the Navy, okay? So this wasn't, and you got to remember something. They've already achieved something phenomenal. They've achieved optical invisibility, okay? They've achieved stealth, radar invisibility. I mean, they were really concerned. You got to remember, the Germans had already built a stealth fighter. The German stealth fighter, the first one that they built, which was basically their first jet, it was made of composite carbon. Our stealth fighter of the 1970s and 80s was really based on the original German jet, the Messerschmitt jet of the 1940s.
Right,
it's made of the same material. It's radar absorbent. I've seen that jet and touched it up close when I went to the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. They have one there. And it's amazing when you look at the conceptions of what the Germans were doing. So the Germans were very advanced, and this was one of the problems. They were creating all these super weapons and things. They didn't have time to develop them like we did. That was the whole problem. But we didn't know that. We didn't know how long the war might last.
Right.
And the Manhattan Project, well, that was the project. It wasn't necessarily, it may or may not exceed until they actually fired off the bombs 4 years later. They didn't know
it would even work.
Yeah. So now the Navy is like, well, we've got, a bird in hand's worth two in the bush, right? We've got something that works. So they're not going to let it go. Now, two of the people that were involved in this project were Al Bielek and Duncan Cameron. And I'll go into more detail about them in later shows. But they were purposely they were going to Princeton. And they were purposely, they were transferred there, and they eventually were put on the ship as observers. People were told they were just sailors. What people didn't know was that they were a lot more than sailors. They were observers. And it got to a point where they started to really have a lot of success with the experiment. They had overcome some of the problems with the people being stuck on the deck. They found ways to fine-tune these huge electromagnetic generators on board. But then they ran into a new problem, a problem which nobody expected, and which really brought out the concept of what happens when you start playing around with quantum physics. Because to people that are involved in that, time and space are one thing. And, it's the whole idea of opening a wormhole and going through, eliminating the time it takes to get to other galaxies or other places in the universe. So on one of these tests, they turned on the juice. Al and Duncan were on board. And again, I want to point out that I have interviews on the DVD set with these people, extensive interviews and presentations by them. And, they were the first ones to tell me the story, so they were there. On one of these particular experiments, they turned on the juice, but the equipment on board started overheating. Again, you're dealing with, jury-rigged equipment that's brand new. There's no computers. If there were computers in those days, it would have instantly solved the problem because the computer can react faster than humans. We have jet fighters today that couldn't fly except there were computers on board. They wouldn't be flying because
they
it'd be
didn't
impossible.
Even have transistors yet.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be impossible for human pilots. I mean, we had one computer that Van Neumann was building, but it was so huge it would have been impractical to even think about putting it on any kind of a ship or plane or anything.
And it was all vacuum tubes.
It was all vacuum tubes, exactly.
Yeah.
So they had this problem of the equipment overheating, and all of a sudden the ship starts, there's this big green glow that comes up from the whole of the ship. Now, among there were many observers of this. There was a guy on the USS Ferrioseth who later wrote about it. There were allegedly at least several members of Congress. a number of military people that said this happened. They saw this green glow come up from the base of the ship, and when it vanished, it was like a green mist. The ship was gone. It was literally completely optically invisible, which was great, except for the people on the ship, because this green glow was kind of creating a choking gas, making everybody sick. And Al and Duncan were trying to shut down this machine, and they couldn't do it. So finally, they just said, abandon ship. And when Al and Duncan, they were the first really to try to get the equipment off, and when they couldn't, they jumped overboard. A lot of the other crew members by that time were too sick to do anything. They jumped overboard.
Can we ask you a question?
Yes.
Not to sidetrack you, but is the Duncan, we're talking about, who was there?
Duncan Cameron and Al Bielek.
Okay. Now, this is not them in first person, correct?
That's right. We'll explain that in future shows because it's very complicated, just so people understand.
It's very complicated.
But
all
you
right,
know what?
I just wanted to make sure.
And by the way,
show, guys.
and if you watch that video set, you'll understand, and believe me, it will change your life. It will change your life because you'll find out the truth of where technology really is and why, actually, some of our most recent history, economics, and other things are so screwed up, believe it or not. If you try to constantly change something and keep making the same mistakes over and over, things can only get worse. They can't get better. So keep that in the back of your mind for the moment. But anyway, they try to jump off the ship. After they do, they don't land in the water. All of a sudden, they find themselves on a beach. They don't know where the beach is. They find themselves right by a chain link fence, which apparently is some sort of a base, a U.S. military base. They see these lights coming at them in the sky, and they don't know what's going on. See, because, and there's no other way to put it, they had traveled from 1942 to the 1980s. And the base they were at was a Montauk base on Long Island, where the future version of the Philadelphia experiment was going on. So the same basic equipment was turned on at the same time. It was only a mere coincidence, actually, that these two pieces of equipment happened to be turned on at the same time and created this wormhole effect. I mean, and what they saw coming at them were helicopters, except they'd not seen helicopters before.
They'd never seen a helicopter.
No, I mean, there were helicopters available, but only in prototype
Well, Germany
form.
had some, but that's it.
Yeah, and U.S. had prototypes which weren't put into service yet. So,
now,
and these were,
this is sounding just like the movie.
Well, the movie was based on the book by Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz, which is the truth.
But now, so far, it sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
So if you've seen the movie, I think it came out in the 70s, late 70s, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, but you know what? Truth is way better than any fiction you've read, and it gets way better than the movie.
Yeah.
So basically, they find themselves there. They're brought onto the base. They meet some of the people that were from the original Philadelphia experiment, except, of course, they're much older, some of the scientists.
Yeah,
much
years.
older. Yeah. And they're like, how can this be? So they're not given, at that point, right then and there. And again, I'm going to leave out a lot of stuff because it really belongs in future shows. It's a long and convoluted tale to tell, so I'm going to give you the abridged version. But basically, they know one thing. They've got to go back to where they came from and turn off the juice in the ship because you cannot leave an open wormhole between two different times unless you want to invite a real catastrophe. And even the scientists at Montauk knew that. So what they did was, using the equipment they had at Montauk, they sent them back to the ship, right back on the Eldridge. A few seconds after they left, they were back. But they explained to them how to safely turn off the equipment, which is what they needed because they had no idea how to do it. I mean, they had been trying to chop it up. They took axes, trying to get the thing turned off. So finally they got the equipment shut down. The ship reappeared. In a sense, it was almost a terrible disaster, but not in the Navy's eyes, again, because they had a ship that had become invisible. Now, they had to report what happened. So when they started telling some of the, monkey mucks that were involved in charge of the program what had actually happened, they weren't disbelieved. The reason they weren't disbelieved is because a lot of these young physicists that were playing around with this equipment already had the concept of time-space, and they knew darn well that if they hit the right combination, something would happen. Now, here's the UFO connection. During the time of that particular event, there were at least 3 UFOs which appeared above the ship. Why? Because without knowing it, we had discovered the frequencies, or whatever you want to call it, that aliens use to breach time and space to come to the Earth.
Open the doorway.
Open the doorway. And not only did we open the doorway, but they came right to the ship. And ultimately, there was at least 1 or more aliens that boarded the ship because they wanted to find out who was doing this and how it was being done. And that was the first time that Alan Duncan met these aliens. Now, they didn't stay on very long. They just wanted to see who was doing what. But I think that we can constructively say that this was one of the first intelligent contacts between human beings and aliens. And I think probably it was the start of the more recent visits, I would say the more frequent visits to the Earth by aliens, because now they were aware that we had a lot of technology they didn't know we had. I mean, here we are, we've got this electromagnetic thing, can create wormholes, we're building an A-bomb, you know. And it might explain why there were just so many more UFO sightings after the 1940s than before.
True, but that's when it really took off, and at least within the public's knowledge of it. It may have been going on, but suddenly it became known that these things were going on. Foo Fighters and other contacts. So,
and it all really kicked off after this incident with the Eldridge. Because again, like I said, I believe that this at least 1 or more groups of aliens became very, very concerned, because up to now they had the monopoly on how to travel using wormholes. And now we have something new. We have something that could create a problem for them. We can disrupt their wormholes, which might explain what happened at Roswell. You know, it might explain the UFO crashes. So in other words, the technology we were using, the frequencies we were using, were directly conflicting with theirs. We were, in a sense, taking over control of whatever they were doing. We were able to do that. And, of course, that, in a sense, that puts us in the driver's seat, doesn't it, to an extent?
That's right.
I mean, we didn't have the computers that we could fine-tune all this stuff. You know, we didn't have that, okay, granted. But we did have the ability to go ahead and basically drag these things and attract them. And that became later a very important part of the Philadelphia experiment, because what we wanted was we wanted the control that they had to move their ships around through time and space. Because what did we really discover with the first Philadelphia experiment? What came to be? Well, you remember some crew members went crazy, right?
Right.
Mind control. We had frequencies because we thought, okay, if we can make people go crazy, maybe if we fine-tune this, we can make them do what we want them to do.
Or use it as a weapon.
Yep, invisibility.
Right.
We were able to create total invisibility. And possibly most dangerous of all, time travel.
Right.
Time travel was born in a very crude, elliptical way, but still, time travel. So you had 3 amazing things. You know, some people might say, well, it was a total failure because we weren't able to immediately make use of it during World War II. Well, that's true, we weren't. But in future shows, I'm going to show you and document where this wasn't only done with ships, but it was done with planes. And
wow.
And it actually developed into this humongous Montauk Project, which was basically
that's fine, Bill.
which was sorry about that.
Break. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Roswell, UFOs, flying saucers, alien abduction. Are we alone? Information regarding this and many other questions about the unknown are only a click away at www.theufostore.com. TheUFOstore.com offers hundreds of DVDs about UFOs, aliens, crop circles, conspiracies, Bigfoot, suppressed science, ancient mysteries, and the latest DVD releases like Alien Files 5 DVD set. Log on to www.theufostore.com and request a free UFO Store catalog. To receive a free catalog by mail, call 541-523-2630. That's 541-523-2630. TheUFOstore.com, the largest selection of UFO products on the Internet.
Don't eat anymore. I don't care. Don't eat anymore. You're going to make... Yeah, I know. Where's Jenna?
Okay, we're coming back for the final 7 minutes of the program. Are you there, Bill?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. We wouldn't want to people coming to my door selling carpet cleaning.
Well, you know, tell them tough. We've got you right now.
Yep, exactly.
So I'd like you to continue. Let's continue talking on what we can do for these last 7 minutes.
Okay. Now, here's the thing that happened. When they realized they had all this stuff going on, they changed things around. See, what they did was they decided, I think everybody was a little shocked that the war went as fast as it did and ended as soon as it did. Because if you look at some of the literature of the day, some of the classified, now declassified documents, the first thing you discover is that there were plans to carry on the war to as late as 1949. And if anyone that watches the History Channel knows that's true, because they talk about it all the time.
Sure.
So, you know, it was kind of shocking when the war ended so quickly. So in a sense, all these young physicists that were working on all these programs kind of lost out in a way, because at this point, the idea was, all right, we don't really need this right now. We're not exactly going to shelve it, but we're going to work on it in a smaller way. So what they did was they started to move this whole thing around. The decision was made to end involvement of the shipyards, because for one thing, it was getting too public. I mean, now you had witnesses, you had people that had seen this thing go on, and that was a real problem. It was a real problem. It remains a problem today, because those very witnesses that saw it give credence and credibility to the whole story. So
and many of them are still alive.
Exactly. So what they decided to do was kind of take this into the academic arena and kind of bury it. So what they did was they moved it around. And what I think they eventually did was, in the 1950s, they moved it to Montauk. Now, Montauk is a very, very old federal base. It was created by a document that George Washington wrote. And it was created before we even became a nation. During the Revolutionary War, George Washington believed, and very aptly so, that Montauk Point on Long Island in the state of New York was a place where we should have a small force and potentially artillery, because it was a place where the British could, in a sense, sneak in and they could invade Connecticut, Long Island, and New York, as well as New Jersey. It was just one of those places that would be very easy for them to do that. So they wanted a force there, whether not be that big, but just a kind of an observation force and some artillery in case ships did try to round that bend and, get into the Long Island Sound and start attacking. So they built up the base. So by the time the 1950s came around, the base had been used for many different things. It had been used for training during World War II, that was closed down briefly. But they figured that it would be the perfect place to move this, because underneath Montauk were all these crazy tunnels. There were even tunnels that Tesla had built throughout Long Island as part of his experiments with free energy, including under Montauk. It was a place during Prohibition where more tunnels were dug and built so that rum and stuff could be brought in, from the ocean, through the caves, they were already existing there, right up under the noses of the authorities without anybody getting, suspecting anything. So there were just caves everywhere and tunnels and the artillery, the shore artilleries that was put in during World War II, huge underground. I visited the underground. I've been to the base many times. It's all sealed off now, but when I was able to see it, so I can attest to the fact that you could get away with just about anything down there. So they moved the project to Montauk, and what they basically wanted to do was develop the three aspects that they had discovered. They wanted to develop the mind control, and they wanted to develop the invisibility, and they definitely wanted to work on the time travel. But just to kind of give the listeners a taste of what's to come, one of the first things I discovered about Montauk was, now one of the stories I heard, they had a Sage radar dish there, which still stands, still there, used during the Cold War. They found that they could take that dish, adapt it, and transmit as well as transmit this weird mind control signal to test it. So this is what they did. On certain Tuesday and Thursday nights during the 1980s, they would send out this signal. Now, it might have started as early as the late 70s. I'm just not sure about that part. But they sent it out into some of the smaller towns in the area to see what effect it would have on people. And I want to tell you, in towns that haven't had murders since the Revolutionary War, people started to go bananas. There were domestic disputes. There were bar fights. You know, some of the bars had to be closed on those nights. So there was definitely, they were getting a result, but I'm not sure it's the one they wanted.
Well, now we've got 2 minutes left, and so we've lightly discussed the Philadelphia experiment, and I mean it's been a very cursory discussion. There will be more in-depth discussion. The Montauk-Project information, by the way, there's lots of that available on our store. There is also some MP3 downloads on Montauk, but this can be quite entailed. So,
and if you get the Philadelphia Experiment DVD, it's also got the Montauk story on there as well.
That's right, and it's a great place to start.
It's like 6 hours of stuff that you really got to see it. None of it has been on TV. If you think you've seen it on the cable channels, forget it. They refuse to cover it. None of them have.
Well, and I'd like to let everybody know that Bill's DVD, The Truth About the Philadelphia Experiment, has been picked up and is now being offered by, what's the name of the place, of the distributor there, Bill?
I just can't remember it right offhand.
Reality Entertainment. Reality Entertainment. Right. It's available in our store, but I designed the cover on it even. It's a great DVD and a great start.
And you'll find predictions that were made in that video which have come true. I mean, if you can see the future, you should be able to predict it, right?
Yeah, well, we're running out of time here, so we're gonna leave it there, Bill. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Watch for other episodes of the Philadelphia Experiment. We'll label them Part 2, Part 3, etc. So thanks again, Bill. We'll be back soon with I think we're going to deal with ancient aliens next. How's that sound, Bill?
Sounds good to me.
All right, stay tuned. We'll send out a notice for that next show. And I'd like to say goodnight to everybody, and thanks, Bill, and my best to your family, too.
Same to you. Thank you.
Okay, good night.